Hi, and welcome to our webinar, 3 Modern Ways to Protect Hybrid Identities. I'm Mandy Sadowski, Head of Marketing at Chaosoft, and joining me today for this presentation is Bob Boble. Bob spent about 20 years in the Microsoft and identity management space. Hey, Bob.
Hey, Mandy, how are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you. I'm glad to be talking about this with you today.
Yeah, thanks for setting this up. It's going to be fun.
All right, excellent. Let's do it. Let's jump right in. So, the first thing, just quick setup here, protection is not optional. Protection is not an extra, it's not a luxury, it's an essential requirement for any business today to make sure you're doing all you can to protect your IT environment. And you're protecting your IT environment from both internal threats, which can be malicious, or the result of mistakes that leave security gaps, as well as external threats and hacks. So just keep this in mind, there's no option on protection anymore. Combine that, and I'm not going to spend long on this slide, combine that with the fact that hybrid environments are our reality. Even with the pandemic, even with the recent rush to Microsoft 365 and remote tools, we're still in a majority hybrid world. And that's fine, but a majority hybrid world does only make protection even harder. Despite hybrid being the most prevalent model, these hybrid environments face threats from both legacy environment and the cloud environment. In addition to new types of threats to cloud systems, some of the same legacy threats continue to be pervasive. So whether you're trying to prevent malicious attacks, whether you're trying to avoid mistakes becoming something bigger and turning into a security threat, or trying to figure out how to efficiently enable day-to-day admins without giving them too many permissions, double the environment, that hybrid environment does give you double that threat vulnerability. You got to think about privileges on one side and permissions on the other, and it just is more ripe for something to go wrong and leave your organization at risk. And let's talk about some of those common reasons that identities are insecure. So what are the reasons for identity insecurity? I touched on one briefly already, which is too much access. Users are over permissioned, generally with good intentions of helping people get stuff done, and they remain with too many permissions. Poor visibility, particularly in hybrid environments. Figuring out what's changed, what permissions have changed, what things are different, can really leave you vulnerable. You can have blind spots that you just don't see something, and you can't protect yourself from it then. Then finally, just simply having a weak recovery plan. Stuff gets lost, stuff gets deleted, things happen. And if you're relying only on native tools and recycle bin to do this, you are leaving yourself at risk, whether that's for exposure or just for that identity being fully what it needs to be, preventing, keeping your users productive and active and keeping them from outages. So that's just a quick little intro. We promised you 3 modern ways to protect identities. The first one is really delegation, which lets you empower your admins yet maintain control. And with that, Bob, I think this is probably a good place to let you walk our audience through these 3 ways.
Okay, great. So one of the issues that we see consistently with native Microsoft platforms, and in fact, most platforms, whether they're on-premise or cloud, is that people, whether they understand how they're granting permissions or not, tend to always grant excessive permissions. Now, these can be done through traditional ACL lists. It can be done through roles, but there's definitely excessive risk because of the way permissions are built into those platforms and the way people attempt to grant those permissions to others. And primarily, the built-in rules just aren't granular enough, meaning they don't have enough, I would say, close air support for a specific or narrow set of tasks. So when you grant somebody the ability to manage an account in Active Directory, you may be granting them permissions, for example, to change the user account control, but that also then allows them to do other things besides, disable, enable, unlock. Could be other things like set reversible encryption, which obviously you don't want them to do those sorts of things. So there isn't one permission for just a simple process. You get 2 or 3 permissions somebody invented while they're programming those systems. So not granular enough is a real key. On roles inside of Azure, those roles are pretty broad, and so it's kind of all or nothing. So if you grant somebody, for example, global admin in Office 365, they can do pretty much anything. Unfortunately, there's no sort of next level down. So if you want them to do some basic user management with one other thing, you may find that you have to end up giving them global admin anyway. And the alternative to that is to try and script it so the script holds the permissions, but they're really complex to manage, especially when you start moving from straight PowerShell to making web service calls. They're virtually required by Microsoft in some cases if you're not using third-party tools because the native functionality doesn't exist. And you still have to give those scripts permissions somehow. And it could be that you grant the user the right to run those, or you try to embed a password. But at some point, you're going to have your help desk folks trying to run scripts. That in and of itself is probably not a great idea. Another thing I mentioned was that they may not know what they're doing. And there's also a behavior that we see in environments where permissions are granted, they're not then reviewed and removed later on. And that's a big problem. You want to, over time, cull the excess permissions or remove those excess permissions. And sometimes it's not even the person's fault, or the admin's faults. It might be because there's some weird complex nested group membership on premise or in the security or distribution lists that are being used in Azure. Or it could be just that there are too many groups and they're not getting around to reviewing them properly. And then a lot of times people that migrate from on-premise to cloud, or they just do all that synchronization with the FreeSync tool, have a bunch of accounts out there they're not monitoring. They don't realize they're out there and active, and sometimes those get licensed inappropriately. So now those might have been accounts that were training accounts or some kind of other account that don't really need to be in both places, should have been maybe localized just on premise. So suddenly you have this kind of mess going on. We obviously don't want you to lose control of your keys. You can have dire consequences, as the picture shows. 7-year-old that is really into trouble all the time with your car keys is not a good thing. So think of your worst admin with your car keys that can let them drive around the block and run over the neighbor's cat, etc.
I love this picture.
Yeah. So the native permissions themselves can be really complex. And a lot of times there's an approach, once they figure out, they usually or should be using groups to do delegation. But you got to remember that those group memberships need to be continuously reviewed and pruned, right? You need to make sure that you have just the right people in there. So you want to keep those memberships to an absolute minimum. And if those group memberships are over permissioning, then you need to rethink your strategy. So first of all, think about what the minimum permissions are, minimum roles or rights are for somebody to do their job. Make note of over permission situations. You're going to have to live with them if you're simply using native tools. But keep those privileged groups that you're using to assign those permissions at a bare minimum. That'll do a couple things. First of all, constant review of those will allow you to make sure that somebody who may be moved to a different department no longer has access. Your security and compliance auditors are going to appreciate that. But it also slows down attacks, right? So if you're keeping an eye on your group memberships that are being used to do delegation, and suddenly somebody compromises one of those accounts, removing that person from that group, should they need to be in there just for a temporary amount of time, is a good thing, because then they won't have that membership to try and expand. That attacker, threat actor won't be able to expand quickly. And some examples of those groups on the on-premise side are domain admins, enterprise admins, and all the server operators, all those permission built-in groups. There will also be groups there that you build yourself and assign native permissions to, so be careful. Obviously those are custom to each environment. I wouldn't know those. roles and groups in Azure and Office both can hold permissions. Users hold roles, but for example, in Exchange Online, you can still grant Exchange roles to users. So be careful there, because you kind of have double the effort. So those roles and groups examples are global admins. If you're in Azure AD, it'll come up as company admins. There are renaming those to global admins, by the way. So look for that change. Help desk admins, user admins, those are the privileged roles. Role and a group are very similar. Roles come with preset permissions, and they're separate from groups, so they don't get managed the same way as groups. And then with privileged users, most organizations that have encountered problems have now switched to a model where not only are they really keeping an eye on those privileged groups, but they're also suggesting that people with those privileged access levels also use two separate accounts. One day-to-day account that they're opening their email with, they're doing all the the Office collaboration stuff in, and then a second account, an admin account or an ADM account, if you heard them called, that are the permissioned accounts, right? So that one you have a much bigger password. It's named something different, so it's hard to detect. And it's only used in the cases when an administrative permission needs to be exercised. So to maximize your security, you're definitely going to want to use granular role-based delegation. Get as granular as you can. On-premise, there aren't any roles, they're groups. So you're going to have to figure out the least native permissions to assign that group. You have to use what I would call simulated roles. They just don't exist on-premise. And so you have to be very careful with those. And it can be a really difficult thing to know whether you should give them list and read and all those other crazy, 25 different ACL permissions out there. But you want to give them the absolute least permissions necessary. In the cloud, again, you might try to create custom roles, but again, some of those just aren't granular enough. But take a look to see if you can do that. Monitor your trustees. The trustees are the people who get the permission. So these are the users or the groups that are put into the delegation group or the delegation role. A couple other things, those I mentioned granular permissions, keeping that to a bare minimum. That whole concept we call least privileged. So when you're granting those roles or those groups that only provide the minimum level, that's a least privileged model, and that least privileged model is what you want to aim for always. Only the permissions or privileges that they need to complete their job. Okay. Now, there is no such thing as a delegation scope in a set scope in on-premise Active Directory. You really just grant the permissions to a group, and then you go to object by object and grant it. Typically, it's an OU. The OU can serve as a delegation scope. They just are working on that now. It doesn't really exist in Office or Azure. They're trying to introduce something called administrative units. And those will eventually, we think, become their delegation scopes and their policy scopes. But really, they only exist as an OU on premise for native tools. And then the final thing is that you want to make sure that for those privileged roles, you might have one or two people that are in there all the time. They're highly monitored counts. Ones you're going to alert on if they log in suspicious times, or if they're starting to change their own group memberships or their own privileges or something like that. But you should look to use time-based grants of roles and delegation groups if you can. And what that means is that when you put the person in, set a reminder in Outlook for you to pull them out at a given time. If you're using Azure AD, you can, pay another, what it is, $25 a month or something crazy like that, to add time-based memberships. We call them temporal memberships. But that allows you to set a time that the person gets put into the group and a time that they're removed. So you can say, well, add them at 1 o'clock on Friday and then remove them at 8 a.m. on Monday, right? So they have the weekend to enjoy that privilege or to exercise that privilege, and then they're removed. That's a rule, not really a grant, because you're having a rule applied to the actual membership in the role or the group. And then the other thing that I don't think exists from anybody except for us and we have this in our latest version of our administrative product, are candidate membership requirements. So a set of rules to determine whether somebody should or should not be put in a group. Now, to do that yourself without a third-party tool like Chaosoft Administrator, literally, you just have to understand what the requirements are for putting somebody into a group. Now, here's a secret. If this is a group that's being used for collaboration and it's security or compliance sensitive, you can grant self-service access to the data owner. So that data owner then becomes the person responsible for deciding who can be in the group and who can't be in the group. So right there, you've kind of offloaded that from IT to the end user, any security or compliance burdens. Now, ultimately, security could be an issue there. So you want to be careful with that. You need to make sure that person understands it. And you probably want to do frequent certification of the membership, meaning ask the person, hey, here's the people in the group. Are they all supposed to be there? You're the person that controls access to your resource. You should have the knowledge for the business reasons they're in or not in the group, and you should understand the ramifications of those. We call those attestation reviews or certification reviews. We do that also. There's some of that in the cloud as well. Again, double your price or whatever it is to add those things for Azure. They don't really have it for on-premise. You know, we'll take up that slack for them. All right, quick demo. How am I doing, Mandy? Is that showing properly? So
Yep.
what I'm looking at is Chaosoft Administrator. And when you install Chaosoft Administrator, we have some built-in virtual administrative units. We call ours virtual administrative units because there is in Azure Active Directory something called an administrative unit. And that is something that is just coming out of beta, I think it is. Works a little differently, but this gives me groupings. And you see here I have my on-premise Active Directory, and then below it I have the types of objects that fit into the Chaosoft virtual administrative unit. And this happens to be mapping to an OU. Actually, this is mapping to all OUs. If I want to scope it down, I can map it to a single OU. So here you see the DN for these objects. There's all sorts of places we're seeing objects, and I'm sure I have lots of people in there. But if I want to give somebody else the rights to work in a particular area of my on-premise Active Directory, I need to narrow that list down, right? I don't want them to see certain accounts. If they're an OU admin with the native tools and they're only dealing with Columbus or New York, we don't want to suddenly, with some other tool, give them access to everything. And by the way, they probably have access to everything right now, unless you're setting those ACL-based permissions on OUs in Active Directory, which again is hard to manage. But here what we did is we created, with a couple clicks, something called the Columbus admin unit. And one of the things I can look at here are users. And so I can do a search. And what you'll notice in this parent OU column for on-premise Active Directory, it's all from Columbus. So we're actually targeting an OU called Columbus. And then I have another one up here that's a little bit different. I can look at the users that I'm targeting, and this one only shows the users in Atlanta. So here's what we were talking about, administrative scopes. So virtual admin units or Chaosoft admin units allow me to scope down what I want to grant somebody permissions to work on, right? And this actually improves my security because they can't see things that might tempt them, right? They can't see maybe the CEO's user account and those types of things because they're stored someplace else. So if you have your OUs organized by region or function or business unit, this works great. If you just have all your users in one big OU called users, these still work because they can either target an OU, which we did here, or they can target a query. So for example, if I don't have an OU, like all these guys are different, they're mostly operations, but as I search down through here, there are a couple here that are in engineering, et cetera. If I want to only grant somebody the ability to work with engineers, I can create a different Chaosoft administrative unit. And instead of an OU, I use a query. And when I search this time, you'll see that there are people from Atlanta showing up first, right? But then I may have other people like Albert Einstein, who shows up as an engineering, but he's actually in Columbus, right? So query-based admin units, or these administrative scopes, go across your entire directory based on attribute data or other data. So we have dozens of ways to slice and dice these. If I come down here, you'll also see, by the way, here's the Microsoft grouping. This is what makes our product different from everyone else on the market. I can go out and actually look directly at my users, and now that Albert Einstein account on premise, I can look for his hybrid account in the cloud. And there it is. So this is the Office 365 Azure AD version. If I'm back over here in Columbus, this is the Albert Einstein on-premise version. I am directly managing both of these in one portal. And we also now do admin units. If you've heard of those, or if you think you might want to use them, we support those as well. So we pretty much allow you to slice up views or slice up your users, groups, and other things in the way you need to do delegation. So now you can hide the stuff you don't want people to see, and you can just grant permissions over what you want them to see. So we've set the administrative scope. So what's next? All right, so I want to grant somebody, maybe what we called an OU administrator in the past, only the ability to work on people in Columbus, and I don't want them to be able to do everything. Take a look at this long list of stuff they can do. So for example, I look at Albert Einstein again, and I select that account. You'll see we get some data down here about what this person's using in Office. I'm going to reset their password. There's a bunch of stuff out here. Well, it turns out that this was granted to me because I'm the full administrator. It's kind of like being a global administrator or an enterprise admin. I'm logged in as one of those highly privileged accounts, something I would normally not do, but for showing the product, we do this. Instead, I want to do role-based delegation to one person. I have a help desk person named Jimmy. He works and only provides help desk operations to Columbus and some folks in engineering. How does that look? I obviously don't want to give him all permissions on the right, and I only want him to work on that one area. So what I've done is I've already delegated through a Chaosoft role the permissions that I wanted this new help desk person, Jimmy, to be able to do. And I've logged in as Jimmy in another web browser. So as I come over here, you'll see Jimmy's view of the admin units is much different. And when I select 80 users and I do my search, you'll see I get the people in Columbus, right? The ones that I wanted before, but notice this list is less than half of what it was before. So I should be able to still find Albert. So there's Albert Einstein, and you'll see I just have a handful of things I need to do to Albert. So let's say, for example, I need to reset Albert's password. So I can just click that button. It creates a complex password for me that meet requirements. By the way, you can hide these too and then reveal them if you need to. I can just submit that. Now I've reset Albert's password to that weird multi-character thing down at the bottom. And it'll go off and do the work wherever I'm looking. Now, I also have engineering. Notice I have, 10 or 15 commands here. When I go to 80 users under engineering, you'll see that, look at that, I only have 5 commands. So now we're not only slicing up the users based on geography, but here we're also how they affect the business. Pretty simple. Further, we give you self-service. So if Jimmy had people that reported to him, he could go here to the AD side or go to his own Office 365 groups. These can be mix and match hybrid for self-service, and the admin units are mix and match as well. So inside of engineering, you see I have 80 groups and 80 users, but then I also have the Office groups that are based on their association with the engineering team, right? This could have been an admin unit, a native admin unit from Microsoft, could be just a query, doesn't really matter, we can do both. But these are truly hybrid administrative tasks that we're allowing these folks to perform.
Thanks, Bob, for that demo. Let's go ahead and move on to the second way, which is really with TrueHybrid visibility that can eliminate blind spots.
All right, this is a pretty short section actually. So thanks for introducing it, Mandy. This is where we talk about our logs, right? This is a fun section to have to build out. So in addition to management and understanding that you need to reduce permissions to their absolute minimum to follow that least privilege model, whether you're working on-premise hybrid or in the cloud, you also need to sort of track what the heck is going on. So that not only can you, from a permission standpoint, try to limit the user, but then you want to see how they're exercising those permissions and monitor that over time, so that if something odd shows up, you are aware of it and then you can remediate it, right? And that's particularly helpful if you have somebody that's trying to compromise an administrator account, or they've compromised a workstation that had an admin log into it. They run a tool to get the password. Now all of a sudden they're using an admin user account for things that it maybe shouldn't. You want to look for those types of things. And where do you look natively? You look at the logs. Unfortunately, Microsoft, without another tool that you got to buy, doesn't really provide any kind of hybrid view of their environment. And if you're relying on event logs, there are some issues there, which we're going to discuss on the next slide as well. But some of the logs that you have to, sorry, if you can go back one, Mandy. Some of the logs you have to worry about are the Windows traditional event logs. There is sort of an Azure AD equivalent to that. Unfortunately, it's not a unified log, so there's like a separate log for sign-ons versus Azure events, changes to the Azure AD users and groups. You do have this thing called unified log in the Security and Compliance Center, but that can be disabled, and that's where you get some of the things that are happening in Office. And then most people end up using Excel also, right? Because you have to compile those and slice and dice them, and it isn't a lot of fun. So third parties are very popular for just collecting logs. Okay, now you can hit it for the next one, Mandy. Cool. So native change auditing is very complex, different logs, different times, different kinds of formats. It's not consistent. So most people do end up turning to a third-party audit solution. Ones that gather logs can be expensive in terms of how long it takes to really gather the information. Did the logs roll over? I mean, there's lots of issues there, but native logs are even worse. You're just going to spend oodles of time and trying to understand the complex items in the log, searching the logs, finding the right log. Volumes of changes can be enormous, so you have to cope with the volume. And they take too much time to analyze once you collect them, and they may take too much time to collect them. You might get log roll, meaning your servers that you're running on premise, for example, may roll over the logs. They'll clear events that you haven't yet collected. But without comprehensive alerting, it's likely you're going to miss some critical change that is going to damage you in some way. It may be you get lucky and that is just simply a phone call saying, hey, I can't access something, then you can try to figure it out from there. Worst case scenario is that somebody's compromised an account and now they're going off and doing nefarious things. The other issue with logging is that there's some stuff that just is not logged, and that's a big, big problem. I mentioned earlier that the unified log can be disabled. Other logs can be disabled as well. You just really have to understand that. And that's important because threat actors are often targeting the logs as a first step. They want to blind you first and then go do their dirty deeds so that you don't have any real tracking of what they did and you don't notice it. Your alerting tools may not catch the fact that the logging has been disabled. But in terms of blind spots, I wanted to mention this one thing. When you go into the Security and Compliance Center, there is a switch. All Office 365 or Microsoft 365, I think it's now called, admins have this switch. And what it allows them to do is by moving that from no to yes, takes them from just being able to be full administrator over Office to full administrator over Azure. And that means not only did they have the users, groups, and email and SharePoint, those cool things that Microsoft 365 gives you, but now they have all your SQLs, you have your SQL Online, your virtual machines online, your Azure applications, all that other stuff. And this is not just Azure AD, this is all of Azure that gray gives you access to. Sean Metcalf pointed this out. There was a similar flaw in on-premise directories, but if you go to adsecurity.org, I highly recommend that. It's a great location. And he talks about it there. We do detect that and can roll that back. That's one of the escalation of privilege. We call them attacks, but typically it's an insider threat. But that's one of the things that we do. Okay. Oh, I get to do another demo. Cool. All right, so I'm going to share my screen here. That whole make presenter thing stinks, but hey, there we go. Okay, cool. So before we were showing you Chaosoft Administrator, right? This is our delegation over Office 365. And any change I make here has to be pushed to someplace, right? Whether that is on-premise or cloud. So for example, if I'm looking at Albert Einstein and I want to make some change to Albert in a hybrid environment, it might require changes in a couple of different places. And this is kind of an interesting situation because this means that you have multiple places you have to look. And I apologize, this is a little bit slow. I'm running this on my laptop. So for example, here I have add new email address. Let's just say smart guy at KO demo. We'll go ahead and add that. So he has a new SMTP address. I see the usage. Oh, this is a cloud account. Okay, so this is stored in Active Directory on premise, but all these features, because it's a cloud mailbox, are going to be stored on premise. So let's say, let's see, what do we want to do? Let's disable something here. Let's disable, oh, I don't know what to disable. Let's actually disable mailbox auditing, and we'll see what we get. And so when you update this, we're actually updating on-premise directory and cloud directory simultaneously. Now we keep track of all those through change history through our tool, but what if you don't have our tool? Or what if people are going to multiple places and updating things in SharePoint and in Office? Each one of those now pretty much has access to the users and groups. You'll start to see that more and more as you cut across applications. You need to make an adjustment to a user account. You might find that in the Teams folder, for example. It's all sorts of crazy places they're injecting. Now, we made those changes in Chaosoft Administrator, and I mentioned change auditing in Administrator, but what happens if people are using third-party tools that are, or sorry, other tools that may be other third-party tools or native tools to make changes? I'm now looking at Chaosoft Guardian, and this tool is consistently and constantly looking for changes being made to the underlying platforms. And down here at the bottom right, you'll actually see that we have Exchange Online, AD Audit, all those things that we need to sort of get a snapshot of change. And at the top right corner, I see a little chart showing me the changes that have occurred over the past 24 hours. I know that because it's showing me 24 hours here. So if I want to see all these changes, what they actually were, I just simply click View Changes, and it sets a filter on our change history window, which is shown over on the left, basically switches me over and sets a filter for the last 24 hours. And so I can see all of the different things that have happened over the past 24 hours. So for example, here's an account, Albert Thornton, that was deleted. And I can search to isolate just changes here, but this guy was actually deleted, looks like today, earlier, like a couple of hours ago. So if I got a call from Albert, Albert said, hey, I can't access some feature or resource, I can come in here, search for Albert's account, and sure enough, I'd find that it was deleted. Now, this could also be on the cloud. You'll notice that each of these icons has a little cloud next to it, or is just a little feature, like a little person or a person with a cloud. The person by itself is on-premise. The person with the cloud is a cloud account. So you'll see there were some cloud accounts and admin unit, other things were created in the cloud. This was done in Azure AD or in Office 365, but Albert's the one I'm really interested in. So if I double click on Albert, you'll see it brings up the properties, and I can see, okay, here's what changed, old value, new value. Basically, this guy was deleted. The only thing I need to do, I don't have to go mount backups. I don't have to, compare to the existing. I know this guy was deleted, is wiped out. I can simply click restore, click yes, and it will go about restoring that user. Now, if that's a hybrid user, meaning it was synchronized to the cloud, in addition to restoring the on-premise object, which we'll see as a change here in a moment, undeleting it from the on-premise recycle bin or the deleted items container, we'll also see that it restores the Office 365 side of things or the Azure AD side of things. And that includes restoring it on-premise, running the synchronization, making sure that it's restored properly in the cloud, and returning all the group memberships on both sides. So we'll see here, I get my refresh. So there is Albert restored, added back to a bunch of groups, and we're off doing a bunch of things to make sure that that all happens on the cloud side as well. Now we also have alerts. So I have some alerts set up to tell me when certain things happen. And one of those is when privileged groups are modified. So for example, here's domain admins. I see a red mark. It looks like somebody was added there. Now, if I'm live online or if I'm working in my email, I would have gotten a notice saying, hey, somebody was added here, would have blinked and flashed and told me that. But by the way, we also do that in Teams. So here I have a list of all these changes where I'm doing all sorts of crazy demos. But in Teams, I would have had a message pop up at the bottom right of the screen and say, hey, there's an issue. I can click and go right back in and restore from there. But again, just like I did for bringing back the user, I can go investigate this. I just double click on the item that concerns me, and I see that domain admins had Albert Einstein added. Well, I know Albert is a person who is a mid-level manager. We don't want Albert to be in domain admin, so I'm going to restore that immediately. Now, I can also set up my restores to happen automatically. So if I know this is a potential issue, the idea is I would set this to automatically recover and then prompt for an approval for Albert to be put in through the Chaosoft Guardian solution. So there's my recovery of that group. All right. So this gives me a way to keep track of everything that's going on, both on-premise and in cloud, all in one place. And the last thing I'll point out is that we do have built-in queries. So for example, if I just wanted to see everything that happened to Active Directory users, I could do that. If I wanted to come out and just say, hey, show me what Azure AD user changes are in the database, I can do that. So you'll see here, there's Albert Thornton, and Albert Thornton was recovered and had group memberships put back. And you look down this list, you'll see there are all sorts of people added and removed to different things inside of the Azure AD side. One of the most interesting things that I found is that you also see mailbox moves, which I didn't really understand when I first started this. So you'll see a bunch of people with mailboxes, then all of a sudden you'll see the mailbox location just change. That's the native processes Microsoft is running, moving those around. All right, we can jump back. Ready to go to the next slide, Mandy.
Okay, thanks, Bob. All right. Finally, let's talk about comprehensive recovery and ensuring the identities are available.
Awesome. This slide is a great slide. It kind of looks like the guy from that alien show that they have on History Channel. I don't know if you guys have seen that. My kids think that guy's hair is hilarious. But this is obviously an angry user. And the idea is that I have seen a company where, for example, Active Directory went offline. They're a sales organization, not us, by the way, not Chaosoft. But the last day of the quarter, they were expecting a bunch of deals come in, and Active Directory went offline. And because Active Directory went offline, nobody could sign in. Active Directory went down. Everything stopped. The entire company stopped. So if you have a compromise, if you have some problem with corruption of Active Directory, whether it's Azure AD or on-premise Active Directory, those things will put you out of business. And just to give you an idea of sort of how expensive these things are, we equate this to network downtime. So if the network doesn't work, it's basically Active Directory is offline. $5,600 on average per organization is what it costs if the network goes down or if Active Directory stops, and 300,000 per hour if you want to think of that as sort of the overall. And those are averages, so some people are going to be much more, and some people will be less. But it's definitely expensive in terms of cash, and so you always have to kind of be careful that Active Directory is always working, which means you want to do everything you can to avoid insider threats, and you want to see the changes that potentially could impact the availability of people's logins or availability of the directory. I love it. I hadn't seen that graphic. So one of the things that Microsoft provides, and you saw me exercise it if you were looking closely, was the ability to have this thing called a recycle bin. The recycle bin is a really neat little idea. So it used to be that on-premise Active Directory, you had this whole authoritative restore thing. Then a little company called Alita Software showed up and built this recovery manager, which revolutionized being able to undelete stuff, but there were some issues there. And then Microsoft, I think in 2008, if I remember, 2009, put in another stagger step or a little extra step in the deletion process on-premise. They called it the AD recycle bin. And basically, it gave you the ability with a PowerShell script to just do an undelete, right? It wasn't tracking changes to those objects over time. It was just simply if something was deleted, you could recover it. They added that for users and groups only in the cloud. And on-premise, it could basically do any object, you could undelete it. But in the cloud, it's only users and Office groups. So there, first of all, you're missing, a bunch of object types over in Office and in Azure right away. You're just missing those. So it started me thinking, what else are you missing? Because recycle bin is just undelete. It doesn't give you any other kind of recovery. Attribute recovery, right? Attributes are changed, stripped, wiped clean with a script, whatever they are, whether it's a mistake or being malicious, malicious action. Group memberships, they change over time. No way to know if somebody had a group membership removed. You start going through the logs and hopefully find it there, and then try to manually reconstruct it. There is a thing called a hard delete, which skips the recycle bin. You can't undelete those in the cloud. On premise, those deleted objects actually go into something called the deleted items container, where they're missing all their attributes. So you can bring the object back, but you can't put the attributes back, right? So you get the thing back, but it's worthless because you don't know, who was in the group or whatever. And there are some types of objects that just immediately do that. Exchange distribution lists, I think, are one of those. They don't actually hit the recycle bin in Active Directory on premise. Hybrid object recovery is a coordinated ballet of different, I think 9 different things you have to do to recover a user that's been deleted on premise and synchronize that delete to the cloud. Complex operation, people try to turn to scripts, they always miss something. And there is some metadata that's actually not recovered through that process, some stuff on the mailbox, security permissions and those types of things. No way to recover contacts. If you make a change to team settings, for example, okay, this is different. This is not an object anymore. These are settings in applications. So if I'm looking at teams and I allow guests into a team, that's something I want to monitor for. I might not want to do that unless it's approved. I might want to roll it back. But at least I would know what's happening. Conditional access policies, right? Allowing people in at certain days and time and certain systems, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Those, there's no recovery for those. Somebody goes in and deletes that, it could let everybody into your tenant. And until you found a way to reconstruct that by, hopefully you printed out a piece of paper with all the settings on it, it might be good. Application assignments, there's another step for user recovery. Wow. If the recycle bin goes more than 30 days in the cloud, the objects are hard deleted. And there's no ability to delegate that. So it's kind of a mess. It's just everything's missing except for I can, hit the hooked arrow and undelete it, not restore it or recover it. You can go on to the next one, Mandy, if you would. So let's talk about Chaosoft Guardian and what we do with recycle bins. And this is kind of a cool demo because it's not just Chaosoft Guardian, it's Administrator and Guardian. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen back out again. It's going to take me a second to get to it.
We see it.
All right. Awesome. Thank you. So these are all the changes that have been happening here. This is Guardian, Chaosoft Guardian. And again, just a reminder, here's the dashboard that kind of shows me all the things that were going on. You see, when I restored Albert Thornton, there were 8 or 9 things that have happened already in cloud or on premise, and it's probably waiting for the sync to finish up or something. I don't know exactly the process here, but I can always check. Oh, it did restore them. Okay, good. But what happens if I wanted to, for example, delegate deletion and recovery of user accounts, right? So our first demo today was showing you how we do we do delegation with granular roles. And in that, I showed you how you could only show a help desk person just the user accounts they're working on. That was the Columbus OU. Then I explained that when that person logs in, they only see Columbus. Well, the recycle bins are, there's no delegation over recycle bins. So you just get one for the cloud and you get one for on-premise. Actually, that's not true. You get one for on-premise that holds any object that's deleted. And in the cloud, you can only get users and groups. So you get 2 out there, one for users and one for groups. So what we thought would be nice is that instead of having to escalate recovery of users, that could be delegated as well. And so inside of Chaosoft Administrator, we've introduced integration between Administrator and Guardian that lets you delegate over the recycle bin, right? And that's on-premise or cloud, it doesn't matter where. So I'm back over to my Chaosoft Administrator account. I've opened up Active Directory and I've gone to recycle bin. Now, in this mode, I'm seeing everything in Active Directory, so effectively, I'll see everything in the recycle bin. So when I do a search, I'll see all of the users in the recycle bin, and if I sort of expand the last known parent, this is basically where the object was located. You'll see there's some from Atlanta, obsolete objects. There's just a bunch from all over the place, right? This is the unified view of the recycle bin, if you want to think of it that way. But now I was delegating to Columbus. So I've added a recycle bin with integration to Chaosoft Guardian here, right? Now I'm not going to search for this yet. Let's go see if Jimmy Buffett's still logged in. Here's Columbus. Here's Jimmy Buffett's view of the recycle bin. Let's go ahead and do a search. And what you will see, it's showing me, by the way, it's only showing 20 objects at a time. So if I were to do a search here, I'd only see 20. And the one I did up here was only 20. So there is more there than just the 20. But when I did a search here, you'll notice that the only place I am showing the users where they were originally located and then deleted, I'm only allowing him to restore accounts from where his OU was. So these are actually no longer in that OU. They're in the deleted items container in the recycle bin mode, if you want to think of it that way. But we filtered on the OUs that he's allowed to see so that he only sees the deleted objects that he is likely responsible for undeleting. And all he has to do to execute the undelete is just undelete. Put in a service ticket number if there is one, click undelete, and off it goes. Now what it does is it actually knows that this guy, it looks like there's some issues with that. It's a pretty old deletion. But it knows that this person had rights on undeleting that guy. And so it sends that request over to Chaosoft Guardian, and Guardian actually does that undelete. So if I come over here and I can't sign in as Jimmy. I have to go to my administrator here. So we'll jump over here. And sure enough, you see there were a couple of accounts that have been changed. There was one that was undeleted. That was the one I was just talking about. Now, this is for Active Directory, right? So if I come back here to the Columbus, you'll see the same thing. I'm logged in as the full admin now. And you'll see I'm only getting Columbus here. Okay, great. But what if I don't want to do that? Maybe I want to do it against Office. So let's go ahead and just do a quick search here. This is the cloud side. And so what I'm looking at now is the cloud recycle bin for users. Notice we also have one for groups. This one can be filtered on admin unit, native admin unit. This one is just all users. So when I go to start doing delegations against Office 365 alone, so let's say I'm at a point now where I have a bunch of users and groups that are just in the cloud, right? So I have a bunch of hybrid users, now I have a bunch of cloud only users. I have an admin unit called Columbus AU. This is now targeting not the OU in Active Directory, it's targeting the administrative unit in Azure Active Directory. And you'll see I have a recycle bin that is filtered to just people that were in the Columbus admin unit when they were deleted and just groups. I can also now go out and see who's in that admin unit. So if I just do a quick search here, I don't have a lot of users. I only put a couple in there. Well, there's Albert Thornton, right? We just deleted him and brought him back. So had I come in here and clicked on this before I undeleted him, you would have seen Albert Thornton in that version of the recycle bin. So this gives us delegated granular recovery of objects with administrator and guardian combined. I don't believe anybody else can do this. And this makes it one less item that has to be escalated. You can allow a department or a region or a business unit to basically delete and undelete objects without having to escalate to the senior management, the senior architects or the collaboration engineers or whoever it is that's responsible for making sure those services are running. And you also saw that you can recover changes as well. So we'll start to introduce change rollback as we move forward. With that, I'll send it back over to you, Mandy.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks for that. All right. So as we covered here today, we 3 modern ways to protect hybrid identities. The first was least privilege delegation. Bob showed that a couple of times with administrator, where you can use role-based access to only what is needed and get down to that really deep granular control. True visibility and deep insight into what changes have happened across your entire hybrid IT environment, as well as identity availability. So something does change, something does get deleted, you can instantly recover that for comprehensive identity information for any user. So you're not just getting back the basics that you might get back from the recycle bin, but much more than that. Really quick, we talk a lot about a hybrid. Be careful out there. There is a difference between marketing hybrid and true hybrid. So lots of companies claim hybrid, right? But that really puts the burden on the customers. Oftentimes that hybrid, kind of in quotes, is accomplished with scripts, bolt-ons, connections, extra products to make everything work, rather than the true hybrid approach and true hybrid architecture that is built with hybrid in mind from the beginning. So you can seamlessly go from a complete on-prem property to a complete cloud Microsoft Office 365 environment, and every step in between. These tool sets are built to be with you every step of the way. So no bolt-ons, no extra scripts. So I just caution everyone to really take a look out there and make sure you're looking at what's marketing hybrid versus what's true hybrid. With that, I would like to thank everybody for your time today. We do have a couple questions in the question queue. So Bob, I'm going to go ahead and fire a couple of these at you, if that's all right.
Yeah, sure.
All right. First question's an easy one. How is KOSoft licensed?
Yeah, so we license it per enabled user on directory, on-premise directory, and on-premise cloud. But we only require one license for somebody that has a mapped account between both. And they have to be enabled. Anything that can be enabled. We don't care how many servers you deploy. We don't care how many groups you have, whatever, that's it. So.
Perfect. All right. And if you have questions, go ahead and type them in the queue. We have another one here, Bob. What all does KOSoft Guardian restore? I know you covered it in that section, but can you go a little deeper on what does KOSoft Guardian restore?
Yeah, good question. So we do users and groups, both on-premise and cloud, and we do the hybrid user and group operations. So there's the basic user recovery or user availability. And then we also do in the cloud, beyond just users and groups, we do contacts, we do conditional access policies, we do web application assignments. There's a bunch of stuff inside of Teams in terms of critical settings we record and recover. And then inside of Exchange, there's some metadata on mailboxes that's lost if you have a deleted user, which we also recover. And I'm probably missing 3 or 4 things, but we are adding a lot of the on-premise things that people would expect any traditional on-premise recovery tool would. And we're also adding additional alerts so that you can detect other things that are happening in those environments, specific changes that could potentially be detrimental.
Perfect. Another question that we have in the queue, thanks everybody for submitting them. How do you know the user, how do you know the user that has started a task? Okay, how do you know who or which user has started a task shown in Guardian?
Yeah, that's a great question, because we're looking at the actual directories for changes. So if the change was made through KOSoft Administrator, we pass that information to Guardian and it can read it. If the change is made on premise, we're looking at an Active Directory log in the background to determine who made that change. And if it's in the cloud, we're also looking at the Azure AD log to determine who made that change. So in addition to collecting the changes, we then correlate those with events. And so we'll be able to find things that don't have events, or supplement the change audit data with events that are appropriate to that particular change.
Perfect. All right. Those are all the questions. One's repetitive, so these are all the questions for now. Bob, thank you. Everybody who's attending, thank you for your time. You see next steps here. If you want to schedule a personal demo, you'd like to download and try Administrator and or Guardian, or ask us additional questions, you see those links there. And thanks for attending.